So in September 2017, I had been praying that that I would see more of God's glory revealed in my life. I realized that I'd become too self-reliant, relying on myself for everything, and that I'd been living by my own willpower to get things done. And so I just didn't realize how quickly, how swiftly God would answer that prayer. By October of that same year, I was planning to go on a mission trip to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, along with Pastor Dan Hammer from Harvest Bible Chapel, Annapolis. And our trip over there was threefold. We were going to get boots on the ground, get a real sense of what was going on in Harvest KL. We were going to build relationships with the church over there and get a sense of what opportunities were there for our two churches, how to serve them and how to really partner. 10 days prior to heading over there, I got really, really sick. I had some sort of virus and I was laid out in bed, probably sicker than I've ever been before. I wasn't eating, I wasn't drinking, and I got really, really dehydrated and lost a ton of weight in a short amount of time. The day before I was going to head out of town and hop on a flight, I had my commissioning. So Pastor Jeff called me on stage at church. I didn't even have the strength to walk up on stage, so my wife Steph had to kind of grab my arm and escort me on stage. After that happened, people were coming up to me at church and saying, "Hey Scott, you just don't look so good. I mean, do you really think this trip makes sense?" So immediately following church, Steph rushed me over to the Minute Clinic where they put some fluids in me, but once they checked me out, they said, you need to get to the emergency room like ASAP. I ended up being in the emergency room for 4 hours, and granted, this is like 24 hours before I was scheduled to be in Southeast Asia for 10 days. They took me back. They shot me up with morphine. They put me on all sorts of different, IVs. The morphine was for a migraine that I had, which was just terrible. I finally got home, and now it's about midnight or 3 a.m. I'm scheduled to hop on a plane at 5 p.m. Steph and I are praying. Thank you for everyone at Harvest Fairfax and Annapolis and KL that's praying. Our families are praying. I was having trouble even walking to the bathroom without getting sick. And Steph at some point said, Scott, they're not going to let you fly if you're like this. And that's when it hit me that this trip was likely not going to happen. And I remember lying in bed, being so frustrated, looking back at my prayer before and saying, Lord, I remember Paul, who had been in all these shipwrecks. He talks in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, talking about, these shipwrecks, and he was persecuted. He talks elsewhere in his letters about being in jail and receiving the 40 lashes minus one for, speaking what was determined as blasphemy by others. And I was saying, Lord, I'm ready for this. You can shipwreck me. I don't mind being beaten, but let me, please, God, let me go out and share your name. I'm ready. Please, just don't put me on the sidelines. I'm ready to go. Just don't lay me in a bed. And yet, I think what struck me was that if you read further in what Paul says, he says, you read in the letter that it's my strength is made power in weakness. And it's through our weakness that we see God's grace and his sovereignty. And in that moment, I was broken of it. And I was truly broken. And I said, Lord, whatever it is that you want, if it's your will that I go to KL, so be it. If it's your will that you strike me dead in this bed, so be it. And if, whatever it is, I'm okay with it. Praise God. That was about 5 in the morning. At 12 o'clock, I had my first meal like in a week. At 3 o'clock, I took a shower. At 5 o'clock, well, a couple hours later, the bags were packed, and at 5 o'clock, Steph and I were on our way to Dulles Airport. Praise God. Dan Hammer and I had a 12-hour flight from Dulles to Doha, Qatar in the Middle East. 12 and a half hours. I slept 12 of those hours. And then we had a brief layover, and then 7.5 hours from Qatar to Kuala Lumpur. And over the 7.5-hour flight, I slept 7 hours. So I arrived without jet lag, totally rested and ready to go. I saw firsthand that His strength was made perfect in my weakness, and He broke me of my self-sufficiency in this. If this is something that you also have seen and struggled with, lean on Him. He is faithful and He is good, and He is worthy.